Hello and welcome to day 2 of Truth and Reconciliation Week. I would like to first acknowledge that I'm situated in Mimbagi. Because of our virtual environment, I would encourage everyone attending to also acknowledge the land that you are currently situated on. My name is Rebecca Smallmite and I'm a financial advisor at RBC in Nova Scotia. I'm also co-chair of Royal Eagles Atlantic. So I would like to take a second to introduce our speakers. Adeline Berg is a proud Afro-Anishinaabe author, filmmaker, and producer of Treaty 4 Rolling River First Nations in Manitoba. Joining her today with other panelists are Ryan Cooper, Two-Spirited, LGBTQ+ producer from Treaty 1 Territory Peguis First Nations, and Sonia, a filmmaker and writer in Cree Nation, Northern Manitoba. We are pleased to welcome you to this session of Diversity from a Queer Perspective.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Welcome, everybody. I am really excited about this panel here. I am good friends with Ryan, know Sonia from around the community. So this is just a really exciting conversations, and we are all kind of doing our own thing in the world of creativity, filmmaking, media, whatever it is that we all got our hands in. So being out here in this industry, in the filmmaking world, one of the things that I've noticed, especially as an ally, is the need for the amplification of LGBTQ queer voices, especially in the film and media industry. So this is really exciting for me. And I am so happy to be here with Sonia and Ryan. So I just want you all to share what it is that you two do, because you all are both so cool. Let's start with you, Sonia.
Well, thank you for that, Adeline. Like, I feel so so blessed. So I am a writer, a filmmaker, mostly a writer. But I'm also producing, because we always need more Indigenous producers and everything. And so it is been really fun the last few years to be involved in this creative environment and try to change things for the better. So like that's always been my intention, to leave the world better than I found it. And so I feel that I'm doing that right now with all the work that we've been doing in the community. So here's hoping. Like, I'm just hoping that there'll be the people that I make it easier for that follow me go further than I can. And I've already gone so far. So yeah, like they can go further.
So tell us a little bit about what you do, because you have your hands in like so many different cool things. Tell us about that.
Well, I write a lot for TV shows. Like I recently wrote for a children's show called Wolf Joe. I'm currently working on a television show for the Property Brothers. It's an animated TV show. And I really jumped at the chance to work for these two shows because they let me write about an Indigenous girl that I didn't create, which was very, very fun, especially with the Property Brothers, because that girl was Cree. And I was like, yeah, she's me. She's an artist. She's this cool girl. Like, she's everything I wish I could have been when I was 9. And so I've also been writing for video games. I was a part of the creative and lore writers for the Square Enix game Space Invaders, which is coming out soon. And I'm currently working on a secret video game project, but it's about, like, I can't say it's about zombies. So yeah, and I'm currently writing a graphic novel memoir. So keeping busy.
That you are. Oh, that's so exciting. Okay, so tell me about what it's like being a Cree creator in these spaces, because it's gotta be something.
I think it was actually worse when I first started film school. Like, once I started getting into rooms, I had gone into rooms with the idea like I was gonna have to fight for every single thing I wanted. And usually when I would go into these rooms, the reason I was brought in was because I was fighting for these ideas. And so when I was in film school, I would often get asked like, well, why does this person have to be Cree? Why can't they be a boy? Why can't they be a white boy? And so it was, it set me on this path that I felt that I'd always be fighting for representation for either for me or for other people, because I always try to incorporate as much diversity into the stuff I write. Right now I'm working on a show, my own personal pilot about it's called Kylie, and it's about this Indigenous girl who goes to Australia on a high school exchange trip after she finds out she's the least popular girl in her school. And so while she's there, she gets involved in a love triangle between this Chris Helmsworth looking boy and this really adorable Indigenous boy that she finds out is trans. And so I always love this idea about having that everybody should have their own romantic storyline, regardless of like your gender identity or your sexuality and stuff like that. So I was like, I really want this cute little love story between a trans boy and this girl who is like trying to navigate what it's like to like, am I a lesbian? Am I gay? That sort of thing. Like having to deal with those questions that in addition to like, do I think they're cute? Yes, I think they're cute and stuff like that. So it's been fun to write. So I've been hooking up with Australian writers to help me write for that character, just because I want to get it right, and I know I can't do that alone.
Oh, that's so awesome. You are someone everybody should look out for. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Sonia. Ryan, introduce yourself. Tell us about what it is that you do.
Yeah, my name is Ryan Cooper. I am from Treaty 1 territory. I'm two-spirited, and I'm back on my res right now in Peguis. A little bit of what I do. I definitely started out as an actor when I was 17, and then I kind of went away from the industry for a little while and came back when I was in my 30s. I think I just turned 30, and started to write and produce, and that's kind of what I've been doing since I was back in the industry. So yeah, that's kind of the stuff that I love doing. I always wanted to be in the industry, and I thought it was going to be acting, but life has a funny way of putting you on the right path. And I think producing and writing is like the path that I need to be on in this industry to create the change that I feel needs to be done. Yeah.
I love that. I love how it's our intentions are to create change as storytellers, and I think that's beautiful and that's ancient. And yeah, we're meant to do this work. So thank you both for being here. I have some questions, and I'm excited because I'm going to be learning about your experience navigating this industry, and it's going to also make me a better producer and a better advocate. So what does the queer identity look like on scene? What does that look like? I don't know who wants to start first, but go at her.
Sonia, please, if you want.
Oh, well, I think it's right now it's a little bit strange because I've recently decided to be considered two-spirited, because before I was just like, I'm not putting that in my bio. No one wants to know about that. So yeah, and so it's strange to be considered two-spirited, and because I had said that I was bisexual before, but to be two-spirited was so strange for me to decide on. That was the term that best described me, because I learned from elders that it's it means both masculine and feminine energies, and so it really summed me up a lot, and I was like, okay, this is how I feel. And so right now it's trying to get the representation in terms of the stuff I write, because one of my feature films is about a girl who comes out as she wouldn't call herself a lesbian, but she's in love with a girl. And so she's navigating that idea of well, what does that mean? Am I gay? sort of thing. And so but it's kind of hard to fight for, because I find that a lot of non-Indigenous LGBT shows tend to be so explicit and in terms of what they show on screen, and it's always so sexy and stuff like that. And my intention, if I may sound a little bit prudish, is to have these really cute stories about coming of age as an LGBT person, because my upbringing as an LGBT person was when I was 11 years old, seeing Batman Forever for the first time, and there's a scene where Robin kisses this girl he just saves, and I remember looking at it going, I don't know who I want to be more right now. And so yeah, and I'm just trying to find that balance right now, because I feel that it goes too far to the extreme sometimes. And so like I'm trying to, and Indigenous work right now tends to focus more on the experience of men as gay men and everything. And so sometimes people who are like diverse genders or even lesbians don't really have that representation yet. So that's something I'm trying to change.
Do you think that has do you think that has something to do with the narrative in the industry for forever, even until this day, being showcased through the white gaze? You know, you have straight men playing gay men in a lot of shows, directors directing gay scenes. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of, you know, the truth is not being perceived. You know what I mean? It's not being showcased in the way, as opposed to if you had someone from the community behind the camera or in front of the camera, and all those aspects that are really important.
Yeah, like I don't know if Ryan feels this way too, but like the focus on use and like in gay culture is something that always bothered me, because I didn't meet very many two-spirited elders until very recently, and I'm almost 40. And it's like it's so youth focused and it's so beauty focused that it doesn't seem like there's room for people like us who may not be like 90 pounds soaking wet and fit into that idea of being a twink or an otter or whatever. And it's kind of bothersome too that if you go, like, not that I've been on Grindr, but I've seen from friends who have been on Grindr. I was on Grindr to find out how to get away from Grindr. But anyway, on Grindr in Winnipeg specifically, there's always these negative racist comments from people that say like no Indians and stuff like that. So like there's still this really big race problem in LGBT spaces, and especially in I was just thinking about that movie that came out like a few years back, Transamerica, where a cis woman played a transgendered woman, and it just bothered me because it's the same excuse that they give to not casting Native people. Well, we couldn't find any transgendered actresses. We couldn't find any Native actresses. And so it's like the problems that we face as a community are also exacerbated by our identities as well. Like, because I think Ryan faces this as well, where it's like, I'm an Indigenous filmmaker, strike one. I'm a woman, strike two. I'm an LGBT person, strike three. And so it's just like all this thing that you have to deal with, where because the most popular and successful filmmakers that are Indigenous are all men and cis men, like that's kind of something we have to overcome too, because people can look at them and say, well, we're diverse, we have these three, and then not give room for anybody else.
Yeah, I've been saying that. Don't get excited about just 2 shows. Don't get excited about just 2 shows. We need more than that. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sonia. Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, like, in terms of your first question, like representation of Indigenous Two-Spirit people on TV, I think that's what you asked, or kind of just representation in general?
Yeah, what does it look like? Like, because it's your lives. What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as a two-spirited person that really just found out that identity is like, for me, I think I turned around 27 when I decided that when I learned about what two-spirited was, and I was like, oh my gosh, that fits me to like a T. Like I need something to figure out who I am, where I'm from, because I grew up in a very like Christian-based home. To the point where we had like a church in my grandparents' yard. That's how, and that's how I grew up, and that's all I knew. And when I came to the city and met you, Adeline, actually, you opened my eyes to a lot of things that I wasn't necessarily exposed to in terms of Indigenous perspective and identity. And that really, really helped me figure out who I am as a two-spirited person. But in terms of my aesthetic and the storytelling that I want to show the world, it's definitely two-spirited based in perspective. Like I have a show that's called When We Fly, about my experience as a two-spirited person in a very toxic masculine environment, because I also I also played hockey, and that environment, especially if you're part of the LGBTQ or two-spirited perspective, could be quite harmful. I'm not saying that all of those spaces are harmful, but I'm saying like the spaces that I experienced definitely were. And it's because of the conditioning around gender from a Western perspective as well. That's what I think about, and I don't blame anybody for that because they just don't know an Indigenous perspective like the three of us know. And I think it's really important to decolonize that perspective, especially around gender. So that's why I make everything in my projects from my T-Spirited perspective. And I always add little things from my personal life in everything that I write, regardless of what like genre, style, type of project it is. I always add it. Like I'm working on a show right now called My Sassy Sasquatch. It's in development with CBC. That's CBC Gem. That's an animated project about a two-spirited Sasquatch from the non-colonial world that helps save a young cis straight boy how to think authentically and be himself. Like, who is better to help you do that than somebody who loves themselves as a two-spirited person that completely is like living their truth? And I wanted it to be a Sasquatch because the Sabe in my own personal life as a grandfather teaching, I connected with as a two-spirited teacher. These
Recording in progress.
Teachings as like straight, spirits, and I'm like, I don't know. I thought that's what it was. And he's like, do you think there's only one Sabe spirit? Like, you really need to connect with who you are. So if you want to connect with the Sabe, then do it from a two-spirited perspective, because there's two-spirited Sabe out there, and they're here to help you and to teach you and to learn and live honestly. So I guess in terms of, and I put all of that inside of my filmmaking because I really think it's important because of the lack of our perspective in the industry. Like, there's such a huge lack of two-spirited identity, or different identities from the LGBT community, and I feel like that's changing at such a glacial pace, but at least it's changing. Yeah,
I agree. I want to ask you both, what was it like to watch a show like Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs?
Oh my God.
Yeah. Sorry, Ryan. It felt really fun to finally see somebody like me in a show. It was just seeing the idea that the character's name Alora Dannon from Willow is such a native thing, because I know so many native people that name their kids after characters in movies. I know a Simba, I know a bunch of people who have named their kids that, and it's such a native thing to do. I'm planning to name a kid after Carrie Fisher, which also counts because she's named my sister's also named Carrie. So I'm actually adding that as well. And seeing kids that dress like me when I was a kid, because the way Willie Jack on Reservation Dogs dresses is how every Native girl on the res, when I was a teenager at least, dressed. And it wasn't that she was a mannish butch little girl. It was because that's how we all dressed. And it didn't have anything to do with our gender. And so with Rutherford Falls, it was also funny to see a girl who was bigger be this object of desire. So I love that as well. And it's so fun to have shows that aren't about our trauma. That was one of the big things I love about it. And because that's also something that happens in the LGBT community too. All the films we have about the LGBT community are about trauma, about gay bashing, about the AIDS epidemic and stuff like that. And it's so sad, because it's I want to see happier stories about us, because it just seems if I only ever watch things when we were children, it shows me that being Native means constantly suffering. And so that's not something I want to see. Bad things happen on Reservation Dogs, but they get to have fun and they get to be with their friends. And so that's why I really love those shows.
Same.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I just loved how excited you got when I asked that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think exactly the same in terms of what's at the root of the story. And I 100% agree with Tanya that a lot of the root of the story is always trauma. and we always have to like relive that all the time. And I really love that, you know, Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs really, you know, examine trauma from a different perspective. And like and it's not at the roots of the story. Hope is, right? Like hope is at the center of those stories. And that's what really excited me, is that, oh my God, we can tell stories about trauma and it doesn't have to be traumatic, if that makes any, you know, sense. And we could always tell it in a very Indigenous way. Like I love the comedy within that those projects. I agree. Even right now on my res, people still dress the like how Willow dresses, and it's like it's insane. Like it's so amazing, and I love how authentic it is. Like I didn't tell my sister about this story at all, and I put on the first episode, and she was like anti-laughing because it was just so good, right? She could relate to that story without actually like knowing any backstory to it, because she already knows the world. And that is so exciting because we never had anything like that before. So I'm just excited to make more stuff like that.
Well, yeah, like I think Brian and I have talked about it a million times, but like racism, yes, is a part of our life as Indigenous people, but it's not our whole life. If it's like clothing, it's like underwear. Like like it's always there, but you don't like. It's not the part you always show everybody. It's like everything. There's always bigger parts of our lives, and it's fun that like shows like Reservation Dogs and Rutherford Falls do have that idea that they do experience racism, but it's not their whole lives. Like that was some of the problems I had with North of 60 when I was a kid, was because like, why would I want to watch a show that's basically my life? And so like, I want to be on Star Trek. Let me be on Star Trek. Let me be in Star Wars. And yeah, like it's just so cool that people are letting us be a part of the modern world. Now I want us to be a part of the future as well.
I love that. I love that. And this is why visibility is so important. It's so inspiring. You know, being half Black, I had the opportunity growing up watching shows and being able to relate to certain situations on shows like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Family Matters, you know what I mean? And then for me to see, and then, you know, we had North of 60. And then for me to see something like Reservation Dogs literally changed something in my DNA. It literally gave me permission, even though I didn't need that permission. Y'all know me, I don't need that permission, but it gave me a different type of permission. And so, you know, the original question was, why is visibility important? And so I changed that question to how, like, what was it like to see this show? Because I know that seeing these shows has been so inspiring. How many young Indigenous girls are going to look into working at a museum after this show? You know what I mean? Like, it's the impact of the inspiration that we can put out there as creators is so powerful. And we can also create an economy for our community, right? Like it's amazing. It's amazing.
Well, related to what you said, Adeline, like I think a lot of people are terrified about having like, oh, an Indigenous show that's only for Indigenous audiences. Like no one else is gonna like that. But I grew up watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and that was the only type of show I saw myself in. Like because you're told as a Native person that, like especially a Native person in poverty, that once you're successful, like no one's gonna see your race anymore. And that show taught me like that's not true. You still have to deal with racism, and you still have to deal with the problems you face as a Black person in America. And so like I do a podcast on the show called Live from the Pool House. Shout out like to my podcast. But yeah, like, where we focus on an episode, and every week we discuss like what I took away from the show growing up on a res about a show about a Black kid who grows up in LA. And it's like it's such an important thing to see representation of all kinds, because I recently watched the show We Are Lady Parts, which is amazing. Check it out. It's about these 4 Muslim women who start a punk rock band in England. And there's this one girl who's the lead singer and lead guitarist of the band, who is this butchy Muslim girl who's kind of boyish, who's also straight. and trying to live the life, try to live Islamically as much as she can while still being truthful to herself. And so seeing a brown girl who was butchy but like boys was so cool to me, because like I love that. I saw myself as her, like, because she was into punk music and all this other stuff. And so I remember telling Ryan this story too. The first time I saw Black Panther, I wanted to start a round dance in the theater because so much of it was our lives. And so it's just like so amazing to see all the more representation there is, the happier everybody is, because I thought when I did my TEDx talk that the only people that would connect with it would be Native girls who grew up in the exact same environment that I did. But the people who came to talk to me were like refugee girls from like the Sudan, and like trans women, and all these little boys who loved playing with dolls, but like had to hide it because like all the gender policing and stuff like that. And so it's like when we say we want representation, it's not just for us, it's for everybody else too, so that it's not just white men who get to be the heroes of the stories.
Mm-hmm. And everybody gets to learn. Everybody gets to learn about each other. What did you say that was called? 4 Body Parts?
We Are Lady Parts. Yeah, it's very good. Parts. Like it's really, really short season, and it's like about Islamic girls dealing with wearing burqas, wearing the hijab. Like, what does it mean to be a punk and Muslim? And so it's like that was one of my favorite shows, because it also sums up what it's like to be Native and having to live a traditional lifestyle when some elders don't even believe in two-spirited people. Like that's something we still face within our own community, like the Western influence of gender expression. Like I know I remember I had a teacher when I was in university who was an elder, and she said that two-spirited people didn't exist in our backgrounds. And like, it's just like there's a lot of trauma we have to deal with too. And I remember growing up where the only gay people I knew were these celibate older men who were like feminine presenting and weren't allowed to have a boyfriend because it grossed people out. And so it's just like it's so strange to be dealing now with being able to be so open and knowing so many kids who have become their true authentic selves because they have the space for it now. Whereas back in the day when I told my friends I was bi, they thought I had a crush on them. And I was like, no, I wouldn't let you shine my boots. Like, why would I have a crush on you? And so, yeah, I don't know if this is the experience that Ryan has had, but I imagine it's very similar where you have to find elders wherever you can. And sometimes those elders are our age.
Yeah. Or younger even.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. But in terms of your first question, I think I too looked at a lot of like Black content because I related with that a lot because there was no Indigenous content. And also I feel like the Black community and the Indigenous community have such like parallel histories in terms of the stuff we had to go through and our ancestors had to go through. Like there's parallels there, right? Like we're not exactly the same, but there are parallel storylines. So I think that's why I vibe with a lot of like shows, even Family Matters. And I remember actually reading something that you just sent to me, Adeline, that I wouldn't have caught unless I read it again about I think it was about the son getting tackled by cops and the father who was a cop defending that. And obviously the people that wrote that episode were not Black. So therefore they didn't understand how dangerous that was to the audience members that show catered to in terms of like, you know, the Black community that watched it. And I think that's something that we as creators have responsibility to be authentic and be as honest as we can around situations like that. And you know, that it really affected me. It made me really look at Family Matters very, very differently now. With the stuff that I saw as a kid, and I'm like, oh, that's normal. But was that normal for a Black family? I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's certain things, even in the Freshmen of Bel-Air, there are certain things that are like problematic to me, but then you can only do what you can do in a space that would allow you to be yourself to an extent. Like there's that, what was the word? It was negotiated authenticity.
Authenticity. And yes, this was going to be my next question to you all, is the barriers, because I know we all have common barriers. Ryan, so you're talking about negotiated authenticity. Can y'all let people know what that means as an Indigenous creator?
Yeah, I can definitely. So when we're writing shows, there are certain things that other producers who are not Indigenous say, like, oh, I don't know if we should show this because, you know, let's negotiate something. Like, let's show a little bit of it, but then like skew this way and make it like not fully authentic or like be fully what it is. And I think that's the justice that I got from the article. But I know, like, what's your perspective, Sonia?
I think it's also a lot of people, like, going from the producer end, it's often the producers thinking like, well, how will this alienate our main audience, which means our main audience that is white people, even though it has been proven over and over again that the biggest consumers of media right now in the US specifically are Black women. And it's like, why are we acting like we have to like not offend certain people? Like, because like a lot of things in Family Matters and Fresh Prince, we're insulting towards, like, well, not insulting, but we're poking fun at white people. Like, there's that whole scene where in Fresh Prince where they're going on a ski trip and Carlton's trying to talk to Will about how amazing skiing is. And like, there's a scene where Will says to Carlton, skiing is for white guys named Sven and OJ Simpson. And so like there's jokes like that. And so it's like on any other show, they probably wouldn't have been able to get away with something like that. And like, it's like they get to make certain moves forward while moving things a little bit back. Like going back to what Ryan said about Family Matters. Yeah, there's that episode where they dealt with Eddie being harassed by the cops while his dad himself is a cop. And there's a whole scene where Carl goes to talk to the cops, and one of the cops said, well, if Eddie had said that his dad was a cop, this wouldn't have happened. And then the white cop was, then Carl says, so what you're saying is you only harass Black kids who aren't the kids of Black cops. And so there's a similar thing with but I love certain things about Family Matters and like that allowed it to be a little bit authentic. Like the idea of there's an episode where Laura gets the N-word written on her locker, and so she's crying and she's freaking out, and her grandma tells her a story about desegregating her library. And like her grandma's not that old. Like that happened recently, like in the context of that. And that was something I really connected to because racism for us is not that far out. Like our parents survived residential school, our grandparents did. And so we're still dealing with that trauma, and having a show authentically tell that, like even the little bits of truth I love. Like I really hated the show Falcon and the Winter Soldier because it felt like it was dealing with those negotiated authenticity, because on one end they'd go towards the like how the US government treats Black people, and then they go back and like pussyfoot around it. Like, okay, there's no racism in the army, like Sam is cool, he's like not dealing with that stuff. And then it just felt, there's certain shows that feels inauthentic when they do it because it feels like they pussyfooted around so much on that show around race.
Absolutely. And one of my experiences being a producer is shows only wanting and picking and choosing what Indigenous anything they wanna put in the stories, and which ends up, and when I think about those particular scenes, as you're reminding me, I can only imagine the fight that the writers, the actors, everybody, the POCs on that show probably had to fight for those particular scenes. You know what I mean? Knowing what it's like being out there. Yeah, it's well,
Adeline, I don't know if you watched the 30th anniversary of the Fresh Prince thing, but there was an episode where there was a thing where they talked about how the actors had to input certain things about how a Black family would react. So I can't remember the actress's name, but she played the second Aunt Viv, and she said like, Aunt Viv wouldn't say this to Ashley because if a Black girl said this to her mother, she would be smacked. And so like, or she would be basically handed her ass. And so like, it was little things like that where the cast themselves who were having stuff written for them by white writers would have to say like, this is not how it would be. And so I think like using whatever power you have to change things is something you need. It's not just a good thing to do, it's an obligation. And I think that's something that gets us a little bit tired like, I don't know if Ryan has this experience too, but having to fight so much and explain why it's important, it gets so tiring that sometimes you're like, well, why the hell am I doing this in the first place? I just want to write. And so
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's so disheartening because, like, as you were saying before we got on camera, Adeline, like, doing all this other work in is something that a lot of white writers don't have to experience, or some like writers who aren't LGBT don't have to experience. It's like, yeah, it's just so difficult, and I'm glad it's getting easier for other people, but sometimes it gets a little bit harder too, because like the people who are making the world worse push back. And they're like, well, we don't need no stories about the gays, or we don't need any stuff about this stuff. We don't need any transgender children. Like, they didn't exist back in the day.
Right? And to me, it's the audacity of people even directing, writing gay scenes, you know what I mean? That experience. It's like, I would never do that. I would never cross that line. I would collaborate maybe with one of you two if I had a, but like it's quite interesting, and it makes sense why, you know, I don't know if you two are aware of the potential IATSE strike. You know, like it's not just us here as creators. It's the people who are in sound. It's the people who are in the construction departments. It's the people who are in hair and makeup. It's a constant thing. And I want to, because the second question is, how can people be better allies to us? And one of the things I just want to share in the recent couple of, I would say even weeks, is a lot of us have been positioned to take up space in spaces we've never taken up space. And there's been this push for allyship. How do we become better allies? And I just talked about getting out of our way. But one of the things I'm noticing is there's a lot of people that are pushing to do things without us, you know, because there's such a demand for our stories. What do you all say to this? Like, have you all experienced this where people are, you know, hiring you and then going, well, no, I just want you to sit there.
Yeah, like I want to hire you to, and I don't want you to say anything or do anything. And so I just want your name on the grant application. That's something that comes up a lot for me because of my visibility from all the nerdy stuff I've done, and so it becomes annoying because even a project I'm doing right now, the first time they met me, they approached me with that, like what sounded like they wanted me to be on staff without actually doing anything, and it's really bothersome to me because it's like, you only want my trauma and you don't want me to tell it because it's too much, it's too scary, it's too all this other stuff. Because I recently went to a shaking tent ceremony. And for those that don't know, it can be kind of a scary situation because it takes place at night and you call on the spirits to guide you in terms of like questions. But in any context, people would hear that and say, okay, it's a horror movie potential. Like it's like a Ouija board. And I'm like, that's not the case. Like the stuff that we are involved in can't be looked at from a Western lens because it's like what Ryan was saying about Sabe. Like Sabe is not just a scary boogeyman Bigfoot figure. Like it's a representation of like the spirit world and like being able to cross between them. And so to be a better ally, I think, would be letting people be like using your power to make sure that the right people are in that space. And it's not just going with the easiest option, because sometimes I get approached about projects that I don't feel comfortable being the person to tell that story, and I will forward them on to the people that I think are right. And it's being honest about when you don't know something, and being honest about because I don't know if you guys saw the chapter 2 of It, but there's a scene where they just randomly pulled from indigenous culture to make a ceremony that could kill the monster, and like they didn't even use a real indigenous people. They made one up. And so it's like, that's something in a lot of the stories I see where they're like, oh, this sounds fun, we could use that. Like even in the book, they have a pseudo sweat lodge. and like they basically almost killed themselves by accident because they inhaled too much smoke. But like it's so annoying to me that like they can pick and choose what they want to use. Like it's like a t-shirt type thing. It's like a pins on a jacket without actually knowing the context. It's like me when I was a little kid wearing the anarchy symbol and not knowing what it was about. So it's like, and like it's stuff like that. Like being an ally means doing the hard work so that me, Ryan, and you, Adeline, don't have to do it. Like don't have to explain certain things. Like because it gets tiring having
It's
to stand up for yourself.
exhausting. I'm tired. I'm old, y'all. I'm old. I'm tired.
And it's like I actually like make people like pay me for my time now. Like, and it sounds so mean, but it's true. It's like if I have to do this emotional labor, like you're gonna have to pay me to do it. So yeah, like, but yeah, like Ryan, I imagine you have like good allies in your life.
All the allies that I have in my life are all my film fam. Like I don't deviate from the film fam, to be completely honest with you, because I feel like it's the most safest place for me to be. And honestly, in terms of working on other people's shows, I just don't do it anymore. Like I just create all my own shows because of the exhausting conversation that I always have to have about general information around Indigenous perspective and identity. And I'm like, oh, like I'm just like every day it starts out with the same conversation. And like, is this okay for us to tell this in this story? And I'm like, how would I know I'm not Inuit? Or how would I know I'm not Métis? Or how would I know I'm not from that part of of Turtle Island? Like, how would I know these things? Like, I don't like it's so specific and so layered in terms of identity and perspective. So being a good ally, I don't know, like it's a really hard question. Besides, get out of our way and let the people that need to tell the story tell the story. Like, and if you want to help with that, then help me get funding for that. Help me get the crew for that. Help me get the actors that I need for that. But don't try be the pinpoint of the story that you shouldn't be telling. Is and understanding that, but still being collaborative is what a good ally is to me. But it's like it's a layered answer. Like it's a really a layered answer, and it gets exhausting. It gets exhausting, and that's why I only work on my own projects now.
Yeah, like because like when I was working on a project I'm currently working on right now, I went in guns a blazing, saying like, okay, you can do a children's episode, a show for a children's show, an episode about a children's show, focusing on residential school and not have it be traumatic. Like I went in with this idea like, well, how do you make a story about residential school non-traumatic for little kids? And I'm like, focus on the little kid. Focus on the granddaughter of a residential school survivor who finds out this horrible thing about her grandmother's life. And how does a kid react to that? They react by wanting to make it better, wanting to make sure that their grandma's in a good place and honoring her in a positive way. And she messes up a little bit. Like the granddaughter messes up because she goes too hard on it, but then her grandmother's so impressed by that she's like, this is such a good honor for me, and like you did what you're supposed to. And it's like because people think that all our stories have to include that trauma, but I'm so glad that when I went in and told this story that there was so many allies who told me like, okay, this is amazing, like you have to be more native when you tell this story. Like the only thing they poo-pooed on the story was like the kids not being allowed to wear orange shirts that said Skoden. So but I was just like, and I'm like, I'm still fighting for that one, but like it was still very cool to write a story from my perspective as a child of residential school survivors, what I went through when I found out about what they went through and trying to deal with that. And so like having the allies be able to let you tell a story authentically, that's also important.
Yeah.
I just also want to add to, oh, sorry, Adeline, I just wanted to add to that, like, I tell stories that are intergenerational, obviously, from my perspective and how that is affecting me now. Because I think it's really important for people within Canada to understand how residential schools affects me, Ryan Cooper, the creator, now in this time. And how intergenerational manifests within our own lives that we need to like understand as well. So yeah, that's I just wanted to add that as well.
Thank you both. And I I just want to share something that that I read this morning I found on Instagram, and I love this. And it's a post by Sandy Bouchard, and it's a guide for Canadians interested in reconciliation. And in the middle, it has you, that's the word you, and then all these little things, okay? So the first one is fix your side of the feather. The anti-Indigenous races are on your side. They don't hear me, they hear you. Speak up, call out, because your silence is killing us. Remember the rule, nothing for us, about us, without us. Look for us in your meetings and at your gatherings, and if we are not there, call it out. Keep calling it out until we are. Invite us to speak for ourselves. Do not dilute our truths and stories through your interpretation. When we speak, listen as often as you can to our youth, elders, and activists. You do not need to understand, but you need to believe. Create space for the expression of Indigenous resilience as well as trauma. Do not discuss one without the other. When I read these, this is it. This is, to me, is reconciliation. This to me is what allyship looks like. Because what I've been experiencing out there, this is to me is what allyship looks like. So that, you both said it. That's such an interesting question. When you're asked that, it's like, really, people are still asking me that? 2021. They're still being asked that? Okay. So thank you both.
Absolutely. No, I agree. I think also making a blueprint in this industry, like you, Sonia, you, Adeline, me, like the way they're navigating this industry is like so new and so fresh, and we're literally like making blueprints as we navigate this industry. So what's gonna work for us, what doesn't work for us, like we're all trying to get to this like peak of something, and the way up the mountain is very, very different for all of us. Like some of us use a helicopter, some of us climb the mountain, some of us, use a hot air balloon or whatever. But like the end goal is to create change and find a blueprint that will eventually like help not just Indigenous people, but also like the greater BIPOC community like navigate as well. And I think it's really important that like conversations like this, especially from like a queer, two-spirited LGBTQ and digiqueer perspective, are being listened to, because we've been silenced for really, really long, even within our own community. Like I'm just starting to feel like a community is allowing us to, share our truth as well, because of the conditioning of like residential schools and Christianity and Western perspective around gender. We're always pushed to the bottom of the barrel and we're not important. But I feel like if you look at the historical sense of who we are, we were one of the most important members in the community. And I think there are many people that are important in the community. And I just want to be, and I just want the perspective of two-spirited LGBTQ and digiqueer people to be on that same equal playing field and with the amount of respect that everybody else has.
Thank you so much. I want to know what's next for the both of you.
Well, I'm currently working on a podcast, producing a podcast for CBC, associate producing. So I actually was telling everybody, like, I'm never gonna do a show about missing and murdered Indigenous women again after Taken. And I'm like, I'm not gonna do that. And then my friend is doing the show, a dear friend is doing the show, and I'm like, people change. So I'm working on that. I'm working on a pro wrestling documentary that takes place in northern Manitoba, and how I'm co-directing it, and my part is focusing on how the community interacts with the pro wrestling, because pro wrestling is super popular in Manitoba in general, and so and I'm a huge wrestling fan, and so it's been fun to be able to be a part of that world, because I always wanted to be a pro wrestler when I was a kid, and now I can be without having to be hurt. And I'm also working on getting my first feature film made, which is about pro wrestling. It's about a group of teenage girls who start start a pro wrestling organization on their res and become the sort of heroes they've always wanted to be. And so, yeah, like, and here's hoping I get to work on Star Wars in the coming years. Like, send them messages, like, write them letters, start a letter writing campaign for me. But that's what I'm working on right now.
Tweet them right now.
I'm working on it a lot. I am working on a project called Fluid about the Indigenous Two-Spirit perspective. It's in development with Crave right now. I'm working on a project called My Sassy Sasquatch, an animated series, like I said earlier. I have a series called The First Horror Stories about myths and legends from the Ojibwe and Cree community in a modern perspective. I'm working on a couple documentaries, one with Adeline called Indigenous Threads about Indigenous fashion. Another show with Adeline and Amber Sakoan called Amber Sakoan Daniels called Roller City, about our experiences growing up in the 90s in Winnipeg around gang violence, but not being actually a part of the violence. It was just always there. It was always the space that we lived in, and I think it's really important to share that story. I'm also working on an Indigenous superhero series called Blood Memory. I'm working on a lot, and another show with Jonathan Lawrence called Altar Boys, about queer perspective as well. And I'm writing so many things. I'm writing something with Warner Media right now, which is going to be really cool. I was a part of the Warner Media program and a bunch of other programs. Just a word of advice to the people who want to be filmmakers out there: join all the programs you can. Like, educate yourself in every aspect, whether it's on set, office, directing, do it all, because you'll need all that information when you get into this industry. So I'm working on a lot, but it's super exciting, and I'm always elevating others around me as well. So, I'm always here if anybody wants to talk about filmmaking, just FYI. Thanks.
Thank you both so much. You can connect with Ryan on Instagram. I think Sonia as well. We're all on social media. We're out here. We may not post all the time, but we're still out here. Thank you so much to the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. And yeah, hope you all have a great rest of your week.